2024. Thank you for everyone coming out tonight. We do have a number of items on our agenda tonight, but before we begin our meeting, I would ask that you silence your technology so that you don't disturb us during the meeting. I've asked Councilman Cosby to lead us in the pledge, and please stand for the invocation. Let us pray. Almighty God, as we come to you this evening during this season of Thanksgiving, we are reminded of the many blessings we enjoy in this life. Forgive us as we too often take for granted all that we have and fail to recognize that you are the source of all that is good. So, Father, as we gather with friends and family next week, help us to remember the bounty and freedoms we enjoy in this great country. And now, Father, as we begin our meeting tonight, we call on your wisdom and guidance to ensure we make the best decisions for all the citizens of our community. Bless our efforts with clear insight, our work with clarity and accuracy, and our decisions with impartiality. For it is in your holy name we pray. Amen.
Please join me as we salute our flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Council, first order of business is the approval of the agenda. I will make note staff has asked us to revise item D1. This is revised item D1, and this is under the public hearings. Number one, it should read consideration of a resolution to remove the deed restrictions created by the West Shelby Redevelopment Plan and Redevelopment Commission of the City of Shelby. You do have this at your table, so I would just ask that you include those modifications to the agenda as has been presented by staff. So I will entertain a motion to adopt the agenda with that modification.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adopt the agenda with one amendment.
All right.
Under public hearings.
All right, I have a motion from Mr. Weber to adopt the agenda with the modification to the public hearing, item D1, as presented. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, please all say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. We have a couple of presentations tonight. The first one is a very exciting one. This on the historic Webley update. We have guests with us tonight. We have Sarah Van Leer and Lauren Woodard with DFI Clearscapes presenting tonight. So I will turn it over to you folks. Sarah?
Well, thank you so much for having us back today. My name's Sarah Van Leer, and I'm with the Development Finance Initiative, joined here by my colleagues both at DFI and Clearscapes. Our goals here today is to provide you an update on the Webley's history, its existing conditions, to provide you with an overview of the private redevelopment scenarios that we've studied, and to discuss the redevelopment strategy and recommendations that we've come up with as a result of this work. The scope of our work for the Webley was to, number one, partner with our colleagues at Clearscapes to do an in-depth site assessment, to engage stakeholders, to get input and ideas about the Webley's future, to conduct a financial feasibility analysis, and to bring all of those pieces together to really evaluate the full redevelopment potential of the Webley. Now, the goals of this scope is to inform staff and to inform you all for a number of different elements of your steps going forward. Number one, about the use of the state grant funds that have been appropriated for the redevelopment of the Webley, to help inform the future uses of the property, and to help inform the public-private partnerships that you may enter into in order to realize some of those redevelopment ideas. We'll spend a few slides, and I'll ask my colleague Lauren to come up and provide a little bit of an overview of Webley's history and its existing conditions. We think this is a really important kind of context for the Webley, looking kind of back to the past to help really inform some of those key decisions that we see ahead of you and a potential future partner in redeveloping this property.
Hello, Council and Shelby. I'm going to be walking you through a quick history of the Webley and its existing conditions. Is that left, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So first up, we have a site chronology, and this is an overview of the property throughout its life and specific to the structures that are currently on site to get an idea of piece per piece how it falls within the history of the Webley. So we can see here it's codified by color, the darkest blue being the earliest. So we have the 1852 Augustus Burton original house at the center there, and just behind we have the separated kitchen, which was built around the same time. Towards the back, the 1852 cottage, which is still on site. Jumping up to 1907, we have the Anthony addition to the front porch, which is the classicizing features, those columns that you see out front, and the flat roofs. And then to the north, the 1907 porte cochere, which is done the same style. Coming next is we're calling it 1916. It could have been slightly earlier. This is just as early as we can date it as to when the 1852 kitchen was connected to the main structure, and the southern L was added at that point. We also have the 1916 carriage house at that time as well. And then we have the 1922 rose garden and trellis. Those were originally in this location that we're showing, but what is currently on site is actually a 1980 recreation of those items. Towards the rear of the site, we have a garage and 2 sheds, and it's determined that those were done post-1980 for the site. We're breaking this down again into larger watersheds of time that are related to the history of the structures on site. The first of which is 1852, which was the original builder of this house, Augustus Burton. You can see in the core residence the bones and millwork from his residence, and also the kitchen at the rear. And then on site as well, we have the cottage, which was an original outbuilding on site. It's worth noting that Augustus Burton did have enslaved people at this time, and there's a possibility that these outbuilding structures were either residences of these folks or were part of the story of them working there at the time. And we'll jump to 1907. That is the Anthony renovation to the structure that includes the front porch with classicizing details and the porte cochere. And then also the Anthonys did an interior renovation, which, as you can see in the bottom photograph, includes some classicizing details. And we've got some great evidence in the form of receipts that are actually posted inside of the fireplace surrounds from that time. And then essentially what happened at that point was their neighbor, Judge Webb, who was also the business partner for Mr. Anthony, said, you know, that's a really beautiful house. I think we should buy it. And they did so and moved in just around the time of his daughter Faye Webb's wedding to Omax Gardner, who would then become governor, moved the whole family into this house and decided it's not big enough at this point. And so did the addition of as far as we know, the kitchen connection and also the South L, which was an extension to the offices, and they were also sleeping porches at the time. They were also the office of their son, Omax Jr., and we can see here Faye Webb in her rose garden with her trellises and the carriage house. And then it trickled through their bloodline and came down to Omax Gardner III, who went about going and doing a major restoration to the project. And the house at that point in 1980 was in a very similar condition as it is today. Then he put in a National Register nomination for it, which is a great document that shows us exactly what he did to restore the house, to create it into an award-winning bed and breakfast, and really brought it up to the level that we would expect to bring it up as our next, hopefully, the next chapter of this house's life. That's the life.
Oh, we have existing conditions. Yeah.
That's
Stay-
less
stay
fun.
up there a little longer.
That's less fun. Okay. And then we're going to go through the existing conditions. So as you can probably see, since this is right next door, it has deteriorated a bit, and we'll go through the specifics of that. I've grayed in here what the extent of the existing 1852 core are, and it does include the front porch minus the Anthony renovations. And then going through the repair work. So we have in photographs here the deteriorated porte cochere as well as the flat roof deterioration. which for the 1852 core are the biggest concern at this point. We do have interior deterioration. The front parlors have joist work that has received some damage, but for the most part, the main stair, the second floor, the bulk of the 1852 house is in pretty good condition in terms of the whole structure. The 1916 additions, what you can see here, included the offices, the southern L, and we're also including the 1852 kitchen. From the exterior, especially in this top image, it doesn't look that much more deteriorated, but as we come into detail, the roof deterioration in this area is significant and is causing water to come into the back of the building and causing damage internally, as well as the interior kitchen and the first floor of the additions is sitting structurally on grade, which is causing damage from moisture wicking up from the ground. And in general, the summary is that our 1916 additions and 1852 kitchen are in poorer condition than the front of the house.
So as I mentioned before, we also talked to a number of stakeholders, and I want to share some of the big themes that came out of those conversations as well. Number one, there is widespread appreciation for the state funding and the importance of this overall redevelopment effort. The Webley property is a fixture in Shelby's history, and so there's a shared desire for this property to once again be a part of that physical fabric of Shelby's preservation portfolio. There's shared agreement that the Webley has the potential to be successful once again as a privately developed and operated business. There were a lot of notes and kind of comments about the success of the bed and breakfast that it was in the past, and so some shared ideas about what that might look like going forward. And then finally, a shared desire for access to the redeveloped property. And I have access in quotes here because there was a lot of different kinds of ideas about what that might look like. And that includes potential gardens that the public could walk through. It could mean bar, dining, or event space that is utilized potentially both by residents and visitors alike. We heard many different more targeted use cases from stakeholders, like a bed and breakfast and a restaurant and a retail space. And we looked at these as well in terms of reviewing case studies of how other kinds of historic mansions have been redeveloped. And we'll get into more of those specifics in the next few slides. But first, I want to dig into the overarching redevelopment scenarios that we think are possible with the Webley. The first scenario being a full house rehabilitation. And so in that case, we're looking not only at the 1852 core of the house structure, but also those additions, so the entire portion of the property. Some key considerations with that full house rehabilitation include higher development costs. So kind of pointing back what Lauren just shared with us, there's higher expense on the additions related to rehabilitating those additional parts of beyond that 1852 core because they are in more greater state of deterioration than that core of the house. If historic tax credits are pursued on this property, then it's likely that this property would be only eligible if the full house was rehabilitated, that core and those additions. And then finally, there's a space efficiency consideration. Those additions are very compartmentalized, which means a future use would really have to fit into those compartments of the addition and kind of make that space work, versus if we were to think about rehabilitating the core 1852 house and demoing and building back to the footprint of those additions. That is an estimated lower total development costs. Historic tax credits would no longer be eligible on that property, most likely. And there's space efficiency likely to be gained because you would be rebuilding back that addition to fit that future use. So some potential space efficiency to be gained there. We'll walk through each of the redevelopment scenarios that we studied, and that's a bed and breakfast, a restaurant, and a retail space for the Webley. First, the bed and breakfast development program. We looked at both the house, which is just under 7,000 square feet, alongside the carriage house and the garage space to accommodate as many rooms as possible under residential code. So that's 8 rooms total for a bed and breakfast space. We incorporated dining and bar space, reception and lounge space, and of course looked at the space to help utilize kitchen and back of house space that would be required for that operational program. And then parking spaces, up to 8 spaces to accommodate that bed and breakfast scenario. So if you look at the first floor here, you can see that's really given over to office, kitchen, and back of house space in the back addition portion of the house, with dining, lounge, and reception area in that front 1852 core. One of the things, too, you'll see here are key program assumptions. We looked at Shelby's current market to help inform what kind of operational performance could potentially be attained in this scenario. So approximately $150 in an average daily rate for that bed and breakfast, approximately a 70% occupancy rate for that program as well, and then revenue from the food and beverage program in that dining and bar space that you can see up here in the front core of the house. Here's the second floor, which is committed over to 5 rooms, with the additional 3 rooms being accommodated in the additional built space on the property. Next is the restaurant development program. In this program, we really centered in on the house, so not utilizing or incorporating those additional built spaces on the property, but focusing on the primary house, which is just under 7,000 square feet. The dining and bar space would be approximately 3,000 square feet, which is approximately 160 seats. With a, similar to the other program, a reception and lounge area with kitchen and back of house, taking up a greater portion of the space in this scenario, requiring a commercial kitchen and more operational space. The parking, as you can see here, we concentrated on the back portion of the property and foregoing that garage space in order to accommodate those additional parking spaces that would be needed. Here's that first floor again with the dining and bar space centered on the front portion of the house with the kitchen and restrooms and back of house support there in the additions, and a similar layout for the second floor as well. Similar to the bed and breakfast program, we have some key program assumptions based on our review of the current market. So approximately $15 per square foot in a lease rate, average ticket per table approximately $60, and an occupancy rate at stabilization at approximately 65%. Finally, the retail redevelopment program, again centering in on the core property there at just under 7,000 square feet. Retail space being almost 3,000 square feet with a reception area and office space for the tenants who would be leasing out that retail space. So the first floor, you'll see a trend here, kind of similarly putting those core uses in the front portion of the house, so the retail up front in the 1852 portion of the house, but the office and back of house support in the back. There's the second floor, additional retail space there with some additional office space and restroom areas that are available. Similar lease rate, approximately $15 per square foot, and an occupancy rate at approximately 90%. So next, this is looking at each development scenario by the estimated total development costs that we've assessed on this property. The range here that you see is looking at that lower cost range where the rehabilitation efforts are focused on the core portion of the house and those additions are rebuilt, and then the higher range being that full house rehabilitation, keeping those additions and stabilizing them. So we estimate for retail being the lowest cost option of these three, being approximately $4.5 to just over $5 million. And this is total development cost, so getting beyond the construction phase to all of the additional furnitures, equipment that would be needed to get to a program that is what we call turnkey. It's ready to be leased out to a future tenant. The state grant funding covering approximately $3 million of that total, leaving a future kind of private development partner to bring in those potential additional development costs, which would range from approximately $1.5 to just over $2 million in this retail scenario. The bed and breakfast is the middle cost scenario at just under $6 million to approximately $6.4 million, leaving the kind of remaining private development costs at just under $3 million to upwards of $3.5. And then finally, the restaurant scenario, which is the highest cost due to the commercial kitchen and load capacity that would need to be constructed in the back portion of the house, to approximately $6.5 million to just over $7 million. So a few summary takeaways as we looked at each of these scenarios. Number one being that the bed and breakfast and the restaurant programs tend to generate a higher revenue or have a higher revenue potential than retail. Retail revenue is limited due to the current leasing rates in Shelby. Now, that's not to say a retail program wouldn't work, but we think they have the likelihood of generating less revenue for that future partner. So maybe a key consideration going forward. The Webley House redevelopment project is a complex endeavor, and it's complex for a variety of reasons. One of which is you have resources to spend that you may need to spend without exactly knowing the future use and exactly knowing that future partner. And then once you find that potential private partner, entering into a public-private partnership and coordinating on the rest of the investment that would be needed for this house. So it's complex, to say the least. So one of the things that we thought through is how to lower that upfront barrier to a private partner that would come and do this project with the city. And that is potentially offering a seller financing tool to that private partner. That tool would be implemented as a loan in second position to your partner's primary loan. Likely would pay interest-only payments until the term that you've agreed upon, and then paying back that loan in full, either upon refinance or disposition of the property. This essentially helps lower that upfront equity that would be needed for the property, so potentially making this project even more attractive to a future partner. Historic tax credits may be desired by that future partner. However, based on our analysis, the historic tax credits have limited impact on the financial outcomes of the project. And then finally, Shelby's ultimate goal, of course, is to determine how to best spend these state resources and best set up the Webley for redevelopment and long-term success. So to do this, we recommend a phased approach to first stabilizing the house and finding a partner, and then further investing the remainder of those resources within an established public-private partnership. So we'll walk through each of those phases. Number one being to stabilize the Webley, and we think upfront stabilization to prevent further water and other kind of damage to the house includes putting an ice and water barrier on the roof, stabilizing those front porches, and doing an exterior assessment to ensure there's no other kind of areas of major weakness that need to be taken care of in the house. Lauren's going to come up and give a more detailed overview of that on the next slide. But we think these efforts will cost approximately $300,000, leaving approximately $2.7 million to further invest alongside a partner. We think that alongside this stabilization effort, kind of at the same time, you can solicit a qualified development partner to kind of keep moving both of those tracks forward. So that would include creating and releasing a solicitation for a qualified partner to come in and work with the city on those remaining efforts. So Lauren can walk through these steps.
All right, so in terms of the property stabilization, we've got a three-part recommendation. The first being for the roof, which is the primary concern. We're recommending, in addition to repair of any damage to the roof structure and cladding, that we have an aluminum ice and water barrier added. The nature of this product means that it can be left out without additional cover over it, which helps buy time to find the next partner. In addition to that, we've got a temporary gutter and downspout. The current gutter and downspout situation at the Webley is a little bit more complicated, but getting a temporary version in there to keep water away from the building is very much recommended, since water is of a primary concern. The second recommendation is going to be to replace entirely the front porch flat roofs, as well as the side porte cochere. They're in poor condition and are currently, in their own right, not self-supporting. And the other concern of that is that as they continue to deteriorate, they may cause damage to the core structure. So we recommend replacement of that in order to not only create a better condition for the core, but also to add curb appeal to the structure. The third recommendation is going to be a cladding and window assessment, and that is going to be to assess how to keep the envelope of the sidewalls resistant to side wind and rain as well. And as Sarah said, this together is estimated to cost around $300,000.
As we mentioned, our goal here is to kind of do the upfront stabilization work that's needed to prevent any further deterioration, but without presupposing decisions about the future use of the house. So being kind of careful with supporting the house going forward, but without utilizing those grant funds on things that may not be a critical point to the future of the house in partnership with that future partner. Phase 2 would be to determine the partner and the operational use, which we think would include evaluating that future partner's operational plan, their business plan, assessing their level of expertise. This is also a stage at which I think you would want to determine and understand the scope of the rehabilitation efforts that are proposed, primarily that full house rehabilitation versus the core and building back those additions. And then evaluate that development partner's ability to meet any public interests on the property or meet requirements that are placed on the property going forward. The second step of that would be to negotiate a development agreement with that future partner, which includes determining the joint investment approach, their investment alongside the state funds that the city is using to invest in the property as well. Determine the terms for the developer's acquisition, and if used, establishing that seller financing structure and the terms for that deal. The last phase would then be to invest the remaining state funds, to spend, track, and report on those state funds alongside that partner, and then once those grant funds are expended, to then convey the property for its appraised value at that time. So these are our key considerations, and I'd love to take any discussion points or questions that you all might have.
Any questions for Ms. Van Leer? It's good presentation. Mr. Howell, I guess we're going to have to make a decision here. Can you sort of, how do we want to kind of move forward with some of this?
I think at this time, staff's recommendation is to move forward with a $300,000 stabilization. Of course, we'll have to bring back an amendment to the existing project budget ordinance for council to approve at your next meeting. That's the initial recommendation, to move forward, get that stabilization done, and then continue to have discussion about our process in attracting a potential private partner. Now, having said that, this presentation and our agreement with DFI and Clearscapes does not preclude that you wouldn't choose necessarily to just have a public use for the property. So all those options are on the table, a public use of some sort or one of these scenarios that we've discussed. I want to point that out because I don't want to be presumptuous in that council may not want that. So that's really your decision as to the direction we go. At some point in time, there'll be a crucial point where you'll need to make that decision as to whether you keep it a public structure for whatever purpose, which we've not identified a public purpose at this point, or go down the road to one of these public-private scenarios, which obviously takes the property out of the city's hands from a long-term cost standpoint. So if there's just consensus, Mr. Mayor, on that.
Yeah, I was going to say,
initial-
everybody good with that, moving forward with the stabilization? Sounds like we kind of have no choice, because we got to do that, no doubt about it. So, all right, that's good. Thank you, Ms. Van Lerich, very good presentation.
Thank you so much for
Appreciate
having us.
y'all's work on this.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very good.
Stan, your family's got ties to Webley, don't they?
My great-grandparents, yes. So
Very good.
let's move on.
I just wanted everybody to know that.
Thank you, guys.
All right, next item on our agenda is an audit presentation for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024. Ms. Beam, are you going to introduce this?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's hard to believe it's been a year since we reported on our completed FY23 audit, but it's time once again for you to hear from our auditors about the fiscal condition of the city as of 6/30/2024. But before I introduce the speaker, I'd like to take a moment to tell you about the city's accounting staff. We currently have 2 accountants, an assistant finance director, and are seeking our next great accounting manager. Our current staff have grown professionally since our last audit, accomplished by many accounting knowledge-sharing moments and extended seminars through the School of Government. Our staff are not only more aware of audit procedures and processes, but also the purposes of the audit questioning. In this season of Thanksgiving, my gratitude goes to Ms. Jane Powell, Mr. Joe Duckworth, and Ms. Sue Pate, who are the very best money team around. They strive daily for excellence in their profession. But now I'd like to introduce Ms. Tanya Thompson, Senior Manager with Martin Starnes and Associates CPAs, who will tell you more of the city's story for fiscal year 2024.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I want to thank you for having me back again this year. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I am here to present, as Beth said, your fiscal year 2024 audited financial statements. Your audit was completed and submitted to the LGC on November 7th, so that process is complete. As soon as we hear back from the LGC, we will get you some bound copies that you can use for your bedtime reading. I always like to start with just some highlights and to remind you that as your auditor, you hire us to give you an opinion on the city's financial statements. They are not ours, they are yours. And our job is to give you an opinion about whether those financial statements are fairly presented in accordance with the required accounting standards. And so our opinion on your financial statements is that they are it's an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion. We do, in fact, think that your financial statements are fairly presented. I will reiterate what Beth said about the great staff to work with and the level of growth that we saw in working with them during the audit. It's always a pleasure to work with Beth and her team, working mostly with Jane this year in her rise to the assistant finance director position. The audit did go very smoothly, and it is a partnership. We ask a lot of questions and we ask for a lot of documents, and so there's a lot of back and forth and effort on both sides to get this audit done timely, to get the report drafted, and to get it submitted. So thank you very much, and pass along my thanks to them. Some highlights from your general fund. We'll see some details later on, but your general fund did decrease $129,000 in fund balance, and your enterprise funds combined increased $8.5 million in net position. On the property taxes, you'll notice a $325,000 increase, or 2% in your property taxes. So they went from a little over $14 million in 23 up to $14.3 in 24. You also had a slightly better collection rate in '24 at 97.84% compared to 97.67%. So to look at your general fund, this is total revenues and expenditures. This does not include transfers or loans or anything like that, just revenues and expenditures. You will see that your revenues did go up 1.8 million or 6%. Those are your green colors year to year. Expenses actually went down 294,000 from the prior year. Those are the red colors. And we'll look in more detail at all of your major revenues and expenses and kind of analyze what happened in each of those categories. But first I want to talk about just the concept of fund balance and what it is and how it's reported in your financial report. So fund balance is basically what is left over. After you take your cash and other assets and you reduce your liabilities, it's what's left. And that is what is available to you going forward as you move from one fiscal year to the next to spend at the city's discretion. So you have different classifications of fund balance. Some of it you cannot spend. If you have inventory and prepaid expenses, those are assets, but you can't spend them. You have restricted fund balance. Restricted means an outside third party has said you can only spend this for certain reasons. A very good example of that are your Powell bill funds. You receive the Powell bill funds every year, you expend portions of them, and you carry forward that unspent portion, and those funds are restricted. You can only use them for streets. Now, the next two categories of committed and assigned, those are board level designations. So the board can commit funds for specific purposes through board action, and they can assign funds, usually through the budgetary process, for certain things. And then you have the unassigned category. That's pretty much everything else that's left over after you take out the other categories. So on this side, you'll see just the total fund balance of your general fund. Last year, you'll notice there was a pretty significant spike, and that happened due to the transfer of the remaining ARPA funds into the general fund. This year, you had a very slight decrease, but basically stayed right at the $22 million mark. So fund balance, available fund balance, is another term, and it's really a statutory calculation that says this is how much of your fund balance that you have available from one fiscal year going into the next fiscal year that you could appropriate if you were going to appropriate fund balance in your budget. And that calculation is your total fund balance, less your non-spendable, because you can't spend it, less your stabilization by state statute. And that is a statutory calculation that says you didn't have it in hand at 6/30, therefore you can't appropriate it. It basically is made up of your receivables. So for 2024, $15,679,435 is your available fund balance. Now, if you compare that to fiscal year 23 of just over 17 million, that's a pretty significant decrease in your available fund balance. And part of that is that small decrease in your total fund balance. The rest of that decrease is being caused by changes in your stabilization by state statute. So you had much less receivables last year. More receivables this year is changing that fund balance available. So another way to look at your fund balance, and this is how the LGC looks at it on their end, and they take all of the data from all of the cities and counties and they run it through a database, and this is how they look at it. So it's important, I think, to present it in the same way so you know what the LGC is looking at. And they look at fund balance without Powell bill. They take Powell bill out of your fund balance and they take out Powell bill from your expenditures. And the reason they do that is because the Powell bill fluctuates so much, and it can really skew your readings from one year to the next. So if we take your fund balance available, excluding Powell bill over the last 3 years, and we look at that as a percentage of your net expenditures, you can see from 22 at 31.8% to 23, you increased a pretty good amount, and that was from that ARPA influx. So you got to 49.6%. And this year in 24, you're at 42.3%. So just some perspective on that, the LGC's minimum requirement for a unit your size is 25%. The average of other units that are similar in size is, I think, 46%. So you're still in that ballpark of being comparable to other units, and also pretty well over that 25%, which would be a bare minimum. So we're going to take a look at your top 3 revenues and your top 3 expenses in your general fund, because it's good to see where does your money come from and where do we spend it mostly. You can see 46% of the city's revenues in the general fund come from property taxes, and then 23% from other taxes and licenses. That's mostly your sales tax. 9% from sales and services. Those top 3 categories of revenues are $24.4 million combined, which is about 78% of your total revenues. So if we look at property taxes a little closer, you can see that increase of $325,000 or 2%. There was not a revaluation or anything changed this year. The rates didn't change. So that 2% is due to growth this year. In your other taxes and licenses, if you recall, the last few years we've had very large increases in your local option sales tax, basically since COVID. And we knew that it was going to flatten out, and so this year it has flattened out as was expected. So those are fairly comparable this year. Your sales and services are also fairly comparable. They did increase about $159,000 or 6%. And those are really made up of a variety of fees that you collect for various services, recreation and things like that. So your top 3 expenditures, of your total expenditures of $32.3 million, your top 3 were your public safety at 50%, your general government at 14%, and your culture and rec at 11%. And those top 3 are $24 million total, which is 74% of your total expenditures. Now, what's included in that other category are things like environmental protection, debt service, transportation. But we're just going to look at those top 3. So if we look at your public safety expenditures compared to the prior year, you'll see a decrease of almost $1.5 million, which is about 8.5%. So last year you did have quite a bit of capital outlay. So those are not operational purchases, they're one-time capital purchases. And you didn't have as much this year. So that's pretty much the reason that went down. In your general government category, this is administration and things like that. That did increase $183,000 or 4%. So there were some salary and benefit changes, and also there were changes to the internal cost allocations where the general government departments' costs got charged out to other departments. Finally, we have cultural and recreation. That did increase pretty significantly, $415,000 or 13%. The main reason for this increase was due to capital purchases. We have the soccer field, and I think that's Sumter Street ball field and equipment, and then also COLA increases. And those are what created the increase in culture and recreation. Any questions on the general fund before I move on? So now we'll look at the enterprise funds, and you have several, but we're going to look just in big picture here across all of your enterprise funds. Your net investment in your capital assets increased significantly. You can see from $122 million to $136 million. Now that net investment calculation means the cost basis less the accumulated depreciation, also less any related debt that you took out to purchase those assets. So that's the net investment. Your unrestricted is kind of similar to your unassigned fund balance. It's what's left that is not invested in your assets and is not tied up with restrictions. So you can see that total net position did increase about $8.5 million in your enterprise funds total. So if we break it down fund by fund, or at least the top 4, and look at the water fund, you'll see the unrestricted net position in the water fund went down about $478,000. Your cash flows from operations went down 114%. And cash flows from operations are greatly affected by your receivables and the timing of collecting those, and your payables and the timing of paying those. Your change in net position was $5.5 million, so an increase overall, and that is due to investments that come in, grants and things like that, that are used to purchase capital assets, and they go straight to your bottom line of your net position. Now, your quick ratio, this is one of the things that the LGC looks at closely on all of your enterprise funds. It needs to be at least 1, and it is at 2.14 this year. So that means you have twice as many current assets that you could pay current liabilities with. In your sewer fund, you'll notice your unrestricted net position went down a little bit, $282,000. Your cash flows also went down about 5%. Again, that quick ratio is still more than that one minimum amount of 1 at 2.88. In your electric fund, you'll notice the unrestricted net position went down pretty significantly, $2.5 million. Cash flows were down 62%, and your quick ratio is still at 2.92, so still more than the 1. One of the big components of this unrestricted net position going down was the electric fund taking over or taking over and assuming the debt of the general fund during the current year. So basically some debt was moved from the general fund to the electric fund, and that is represented as a decrease in the net position this year. In your gas fund, you'll notice a decrease of about $2 million in your unrestricted net position. Your cash flows were actually up 14% in your gas fund. Now, you do have a couple other enterprise funds, the stormwater and housing. They were comparable to the prior year, nothing really to note there. You do have the quick ratio of more than 1 in your gas fund as well at 3.77%. So the final component of my presentation are performance indicators. So we have, as your auditor, we're not looking for findings. We're not looking for material weaknesses. If we happen to come across them, we're required to report them to you. We did not find any material weaknesses. We did not have any findings to report. Now, the LGC has other criteria that they look at that they call key performance indicators of concern. So they take all of the data from your report, and they have ratios and analysis that they do. And sometimes a red flag will pop up and say, hey, we think this is something you need to look at and address. So that's what we're going to talk about now. So of all of those performance indicators that the LGC looks at, you have mostly positive. You have the general fund balance available that we discussed. Your enterprise fund quick ratios were all over 1. Your audit was submitted timely. You have stable property tax valuation and collection percentages. There was one performance indicator that did come out that needs a response to the LGC. And this was basically, as I mentioned, that assumption of debt in the electric fund from the general fund created a situation where there was a transfer that was in excess of the amounts described in General Statute 159B-39. So this was a one-time excess transfer in the electric fund. I believe a written response has already been provided and just requires approval from the board. So that is due within 60 days. I'm sure that'll be handled well within that 60-day window. That is the end of my presentation. I am happy to take any questions if anyone has them. My contact information is available if you have any questions after the fact.
So you said a letter had been submitted. That has been submitted to the LGC?
That letter is, I believe, to you for your consent.
Gotcha. All right. Are there questions? Thank you.
All right.
Good
Thank you very much.
presentation. All right, next item on our agenda is our public comment. Tonight, we have no one signed up for public comment, all right? All right, we're next down to item D, public hearings. And the first item we have is consideration of a resolution to remove deed restrictions created by the West Shelby Redevelopment Plan and Redevelopment Commission. Mr. Lunsford, are you going to introduce this?
Yes, thank you. This, let me get to the podium, thanks. So this came about, again, based on multiple developers, at least two, that contacted the planning department. The planning department then asked for my help and insight in researching the West Shelby redevelopment plan and options that the city may have related to the deed restrictions that were put in place roughly 40 years ago. I have followed the guidelines from the statute and reached out to the School of Government and presenting this to you all. The first step that you all took was to abolish the Redevelopment Commission, since the commission wasn't chaired for a number of years, which also allowed you all to have the direct power and authority to make any decisions that you deem fit and in the best interest of the city, rather than relying on the Development Commission and reforming the Development Commission that, again, just didn't exist at the time. In the requirements to address the deed restrictions, the statute requires public notice to be done at least 15 days prior to the hearing for 2 consecutive weeks. I've done that. And then in addition to that, I went above what the statutory requirements are and sent mailed notices to the property owners. Many of the property owners actually don't live in Shelby. Some live in Kings Mountain, some live in South Carolina. And so I went ahead and sent mailed notices directly to what was listed on the county's tax website. And so with that said, I want to first start with showing you a historical overview of what the West Shelby redevelopment plan entailed through newspaper clippings that we were able to find in the planning department, show you what the original maps of the area looked like and what it currently looks like, so that you can make a decision as to how you wish to move forward. So back in the 1980s, there were plans that were presented to the council and to the citizens as required. When you have a redevelopment board, citizen input is required. And so this is part of what the map looked like in terms of figuring out where to address the finances and the HUD grant funding that was coming in at the time. And what I found pretty interesting is there were plans to roughly get $6 million and to build a 25-acre city park. That is not the same as what's at Sumter Street. The Sumter Street Park existed. This was to create another park, which obviously does not exist. That park never came to fruition, but it was a driving part of some of the discussions. And eventually, it was approved. This is dated August 21st, 1991, and there were $3 million from HUD that was set aside to start with that, and that funding was to address blight. And this next one is, I think, pretty indicative of what the city was looking at. And so I'll read this if you don't mind. The West Shelby area contains some of the city's worst slums. About 61 homes that cannot be saved and rehabilitated to standard condition will probably be demolished. It is anticipated that about 77 families will have to be relocated during the 3 years of the project. Loans and grants will be made available to assist them. So this is what the redevelopment plan was intended to address and where the money was intended to go. Under the plans, if the houses could be repaired, they were to be repaired. If they were too far gone, they were to be demolished and families were to be relocated and rehoused through the grant funds that the city received. Part of that also included kind of redoing the landscape, if you will, of various roads and alleyways. And so I'll show you that on the next map. So this is what Robert Street actually used to look like. This was or is a map that is contained in the mapping department of the county. If you look here, these open spaces were alleyways that existed, and these two fronts here are the Robert Street parcels that I'm going to show you here in more detail. And so again, this is the original map. This incorporates prior to the West Shelby redevelopment plan taking effect. And unfortunately, I don't have the date. They didn't record the date on the maps. So there are use restrictions. This is, again, a reminder of what the use restriction states. The main parcel that was brought to the city's attention is 509 Robert Street. I'm presenting to you 5 total parcels for your consideration. I did notify the attorney that's representing the behalf of the developer and noted to that attorney that we'd be having a hearing today in the event that the developer came to speak. I don't believe the developer came, but nonetheless, I'm presenting to you all what it should say. So this word "not" was mistakenly left out of the deed, but the intent was it should say this parcel may not be used independently for construction. So you would have to buy another parcel and have the 2 parcels combined in order to develop a lot. That is really important, and I'll show you why here when I get to the maps in just 2 more slides. These are the 5 parcels that I've identified. I pulled the deeds back all the way to the 1980s and further to ensure that I could identify I only focused on the Robert Street parcels. I didn't have the ability to look at any other particular streets within the West Shelby redevelopment or that may have been affected. That wasn't what was asked through the developer. So again, I only focused on this particular street and identified these parcels. So this is the present map. This is what is also recorded in the county mapping department. You'll note that there's dashed lines. Those dashed lines are where the alleyway used to be. The city closed those through ordinance, and that property goes to the property owners that live and maintain next to those alleyways, so it's equally divided in ownership. And then if you see number 5, I'll point to it where the number 3 is also. So right here. So you'll notice that it is 5 and 14. Let me go backwards really quick. So you'll see where the number 3 is again. You'll notice that number 14 is not there. Number 5 was split, and that is where 509 Robert Street is. So roughly in 2000, that parcel got split into 2 parcels, and it is now 509, which is where the 5 is, and then the 14 is identified simply as a parcel number. That's not identified by a lot number. And then 7 and 8, those front Martin Street, and then Clegg Street. There's a couple of properties that front Clegg Street. So this will give you a better idea here. So again, this is an overview. 508 and 512 are owned by the same property owner. This parcel is owned by a different person. This is owned by a different person. And then the other property that is affected, making up 5 total parcels, is 511. So under the current deed use restriction, you would have to buy 511, 509, plus the split parcel in order to build a house on it. 512 and 508 would also have to be purchased and owned together and then combined to build a house on it. Technically, there's already a house on 512, and it is owned by the same owners. It was sold April of this year. The gentleman that owned it lived in South Carolina. The current owners actually live at the house and have a Shelby residence. So this will give you a better idea here. So this is the overlay of the houses that currently exist, and you'll notice that there are several lots that are vacant without a house on them. And so this would, again, allow the developer to basically build on these lots if you so choose. Any questions?
Questions for Mr. Lunsford?
The one where the 3 was, what's that street number again? The
So-
skinny, the way too skinny one.
Yeah, so 509, that's the, where the developer is looking to build.
On it at its current size?
That's right.
Yikes.
Yeah, so if you give me, I have actually with me, so 1 second.
So would that
508,
not be a
and so this is-
non-conforming size?
I don't have that memorized. I'm not certain. I don't know. Let me see. Lot size. Thought I had it on this. Trying.
What's the question again?
I wanted to know if that was a non-conforming lot, because of that size. I just,
I thought I had it on this slide, but I don't see the lot size on here.
Part of that redevelopment over there.
Oh, here it is. It's 0.05. It looks like acres. So it is very small.
yeah.
0.05. I'm not sure if what you can build on that. I was not told by the redeveloper that they intended to buy the other parcel, which is next to it. That's 0.16. Again, I cannot speak to the full details. I don't know the redeveloper. The attorney has not provided me much in terms of details, and unfortunately, they're not here. I'm sorry, that's 508. This is the other parcel here, which looks like it is 0.86. So together, it would be about a 0.2 maybe that you could build on. I couldn't speak to how or why they divided the property. By law, the deed use restrictions flow with the land or run with the land, and so just because they split the property doesn't mean that they can deed away the use restrictions. The use restrictions by operational law do attach to both of these parcels. But that's what I can tell you.
So, yeah, I would love to know if that was going to end up being, you know what I'm talking about, Rick, right?
I mean, the term is lot of record, and
Right.
that would depend, and I think Mr. Burgess probably could better address that. Typically, a lot of record is going to be able to be built upon as long as they can meet the building code, and I don't think, I think there's some question as to whether or not the setbacks would even apply on a lot of record.
That's what I was
So, Brian,
asking.
you want to address that, please?
Mr. Howe's exactly correct. So the lot would have to basically meet all the other dimensional requirements, setbacks included. So let's say that you've got a parcel that's, I don't know, 4,000 square feet too small, but it's configured in a way that you can meet every other requirement or setbacks or anything like that, minimum lot width. We would allow you to get a permit for that. Of course, you would have to meet building codes, you'd have to meet everything else. But nothing else is basically exempted. The only thing that's exempted is that minimum lot size. So in this situation, how narrow that is, I think they have a challenge on their hands fitting it, but it's really a matter of sort of how the lot's laid out at that point.
So it's not impossible, but it probably would a fairly big challenge.
Yes, sir. A puzzle for sure.
But regardless of whether we lift the deed restrictions, they'd be allowed to build on it as a grandfathered lot, right?
No.
Okay.
These. So these. They would have to purchase 509 and recombine it from the split and 511. The way the use restriction is, because there's already a house on 505, so you have to combine and purchase more. 508 and 512 are under the same ownership, and so they technically meet the use restriction, and they have a residence there. But in order to build 511, 509, and again, I'll just call it the split section, they would have to purchase technically those 3 parcels in order to then build. Without purchasing and owning all 3, the way the use restriction is, you should not be building on them.
And keep
Which-
in mind,
which-
those type houses that was on that land, if you look at it real closely, those houses was 3-room houses. You walk in the front door. I'm familiar with that because as a police officer, used to work that area. Those houses, you walk on the front porch, you walk into the living room. In the middle of the house was a kitchen. Then there was a bathroom, and then there was a back bedroom. It's narrow. You can't build no house today's standard on no single lot that's shown on that map. So therefore, you got to buy multiple lots in the today's standards. If you notice where Habitat Humanities that built over in that area, and they were successful, they had to acquire all that land, and then they put decent-sized houses on it. So that map is showing you, back in the day, that's the kind of houses that Shelby had, and they used to call them mill houses.
Shotgun houses, too.
What-
There you go.
What they're looking to do is lift deed restrictions so that they can build on itty-bitty, non-conforming sized lots. That's what they want us to agree to today. And would like, so that they can build on these teeny bits. Whereas right now, the deed restrictions say that they'd have to buy both lots and put one house on it, and it would have normal-sized
They have
yards.
to have 6,000 square foot lot.
A normal-sized yard.
Because, I mean, it says so that the deed restrictions can be removed so that
They can build on
move
those-
forward on building under the current zoning.
That's
No,
right.
on those tiny little lots, like they'd be allowed to build on that
No,
tiny
but-
sliver.
Wait a minute, hold on, one at a time, one at
That
a
is
time.
what it is.
Sorry, Mr.
Mr.
Weber,
Weber.
you're
No,
asking.
no, I'm reading, it said, this will allow the properties to be developed under the provisions of current zoning and building code regulations.
Yes, sir. It only lifts the deed restriction, so they do have to be able to build within the zoning and the UDO that we have. If it is, as Mr. Burgess said, possible, even though it's a puzzle, that's what this vote, if you choose to vote, would do. If you choose not to, then that's just basically leaving it within this split. That's your choice, however you want to do that, but that's what would be accomplished.
All right, wait, we've got a public hearing, so I want to make, these questions and conversation is good, but I want us to get to the public hearing, and then we can deliberate on the pros and cons of the merits of this issue. Do you have anything else, Mr. Lunsford?
No, I will entertain any other questions.
All right,
but-
are there any more questions? All right, I will open the public hearing at 7:06. We're now in our public hearing, and I have no one signed up to speak, so I'll close the public hearing at 7:07. Now, we are in deliberation, council.
Over near my house, sorry,
Go ahead.
thank you. On West Marion Street, a grandfathered lot, a lot of record, et cetera, that wasn't restricted by deed restrictions, was built upon recently. Itty bitty little house on an itty bitty little, way too skinny lot, shoved between houses. On, it doesn't fit there. They also let their permits expire and never finished the house, so it's just sitting there half finished. But one of these itty bitty little lots where nothing really should fit. Honestly, we wish deed restrictions had existed that kept that from being allowed to be built on like that. So it's just personal. That's my personal experience with a way too skinny lot having something built on it recently. And that's what they're asking us to do.
Now, what I'm understanding is that has got to meet all the criteria from the building inspector. They cannot build a house on less than 6,000 feet. Is that correct?
No.
I don't.
I mean, we've got deed restrictions. We've got restrictions.
Yeah, I don't have those memorized. I don't know what those are, but if they were to build it, it has to be to whatever the UDO requires.
Minus-
R6.
Right.
So, to answer your question, the lot of record is the lot of record. So it could be built upon only if it meets the standards that are within the UDO. So if you've got a lot of record that can't meet the setbacks, Mr. Burgess, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if you've got a lot that cannot meet the setbacks, then it could not be built upon. Is that correct, Mr. Burgess? Okay, so if you have a narrow lot anyway, and you're going to build a home, you still have to meet the setbacks, you still have to meet the requirements. But the lot of record is the lot of record. It was established prior to zoning, and so there is the presumption under the statutes that if I own a small lot and then the city comes in and zones and sets minimum standards, I can still use my lot that existed prior to zoning. Does that make sense?
Even though
But
it doesn't conform to current zoning.
yes, because it doesn't
Right.
have to, because
I
that's
understand.
what the general statutes and the
Yes.
General Assembly intended.
A grandfathered lot.
Right, because I already owned it before you zoned it. But if they cannot meet the standards in terms of setbacks and otherwise, they couldn't build on the lot. So it really just depends upon, they could build a tiny house, supposedly, or something of that nature to meet setbacks. So that's the answer to the question in terms of whether it can be built upon, is it depends.
But as the deed restrictions sit right now, because, I don't know, people back then had some forethought, that can't be built upon unless they buy the adjoining lot. So it would have a decent sized yard.
All right, okay, with all that being said,
I just want to make sure it's clear.
hey, I want to make a motion that we abolish the redevelopment commission of
Well,
the city.
well,
Gotta read the other thing.
Mr. White, there's an ordinance that's been prepared,
Oh, okay, okay.
resolution, resolution.
Okay, I make a motion to approve the rezoning request for the,
No,
no, wait a minute, that's the wrong one.
it's the attachment.
That's, it's this one here. It's that one.
This-
You had a revised
Revised one.
resolution.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see it, all right. I make a motion to remove the deed restrictions created by the West Shelby redevelopment plan and the redevelopment commission of the city of Shelby, resolution number 672024.
I have a motion from Mr. White to adopt resolution number 67-2024. Is there any additional conversation or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. That's 4. Are those opposed? One against. Motion passes. Thank you. All right, next item on our agenda is consideration of a proposed ordinance designating a local historic landmark for Seven Gables.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Okay, so this is something that does not come before you guys very frequently, so I'm going to give you a quick background, even if I'm sure most of you have done this before, just as a refresher. The county handles our historic preservation and landmarks considerations through their Historic Preservation Commission. State law says, though, that anytime we designate an historic landmark and it's within the city's jurisdiction, City Council is the governing board that makes the final call on designating those as a landmark. So tonight, Seven Gables has requesting that we designate, the owners of Seven Gables is requesting we designate their building as a local landmark. This is the home in question. It is a Tudor revival style. It was designed by Franklin Gordon of Charlotte, built in 1929, and had some repairs in 1935 due to a fire. It has been given a favorable recommendation by both the State Historic Preservation Office as well as the County Historic Preservation Commission, and it is now before you to decide whether or not you would be interested in designating it as a landmark. 160D does require that we have a public hearing for that, so I think that'll follow this presentation. And two things to kind of keep in mind when you do this. Any owner who wishes to make a change to the property, if it's designated as a historic landmark, must first have the plans reviewed and approved by the Historic Preservation Commission by applying for a certificate of appropriateness. And generally, those are going to be followed by or accompanied by standards that are part of the county's design guidelines. And the owner of a designated landmark can apply for an annual 50% property tax deferral as long as its important features are retained, similar to what we heard about the Webley House, that historic tax credit. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Otherwise, I will step out of the way.
Any questions from Mr. Burgess?
I may have missed it, but what's the historical significance of this property?
It's a Tudor revival style built in 1929, and generally speaking, that's an architectural style that we're not holding on to a lot of those structures of.
All right. Any more questions? All right. I will open the public hearing at 7:15. And I have one person signed up. When I call out your name, if you would please come forward and state your name and address. Elizabeth Champion. Yeah.
I'm Elizabeth Champion. My address is 1340 East Marion Street, Shelby, North Carolina. And I wanted to, can I talk now?
Sure.
Okay. So I worked with our consultant to make sure what I say is concise and appropriate, so I don't sway you, because this was really important to Jeremy and I, who's here. He's just not talking. So we have always appreciated historic architecture, and we left it the opportunity to rehab Seven Gables. Our meticulous restoration involved removing or reversing modifications that obscured the original features. All repairs and updates were executed in a sensitive manner. Overgrown and diseased vegetation was removed from the site, revealing the stone pond and fountain. Seven Gables has been listed in the National Registry of Historic Places in recognition of its architectural significance. However, and this is the big however, and while we're here tonight, this is just an honorary designation. It will not provide any protection from the future alteration or demolition of this property. Therefore, we feel that the local historic landmark designation is the best means to ensure that the distinctive qualities of the building and landscape are preserved long into the future. Far too often, character-defining windows and doors are replaced, interiors irrevocably altered, and settings destroyed. We hope that the local historic landmark designation will avert this fate for Seven Gables. Thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Champion. All right, council, we have no one else signed up, so I will close the public hearing at 7:17.
Jeremy, I want you to know, God, boy, that's loud. I want you to know you did it. You and your wife did a great job. It looks great. I'm proud of you.
Sure does.
Can I make a motion?
Sure,
Yes.
go ahead.
I make a motion that we approve ordinance number 66-2024.
I have a motion from Ms. Orth to adopt ordinance number 66-2024. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is consideration of an ordinance to extend the corporate limits of the city of Shelby. Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. This is tied to a conditional zoning request that will be coming before you later. It's one that you have seen a few months ago. It was a request that you asked that the planning board reconsider for additional details. It is back before you tonight. This is the required public hearing for the annexation. However, because it's currently in our extraterritorial jurisdiction, the parcels are listed above you. It's roughly 46 acres in question for this. And again, it is tied to a proposed R6 conditional zoning single-family subdivision. This orange hatched area is the parcel in question. The project is tied to 2 additional parcels, but those are already within city limits. So you're only annexing the part that's not in city limits that would be a part of this project. Notice for public hearing was published on August 28th and September 4th, and we have gone through the sort of the 3-step process that we go through, but because it was tabled, we're now bringing it back before you tonight, and there has been additional notice published, and we'll have to go through that tonight, and then in unfinished business, we'll handle the zoning itself. So happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Burgess? All right, I'll open the public hearing at 7:20. And I got one person's name, Todd, and I can't read the last name, but if you would state your name and address. And
Yes, sir. Todd Dupina, 8307 Hampton Fair Lane, Waxhaw, North Carolina. I'm the applicant. I'm just here in case you guys have any questions or anything you would like to discuss. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you, sir. Close the public hearing at 7:21.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the rezoning request for the 46.
No. We're on item number 3 under public hearings.
Consideration of an ordinance extending the corporate center city limits.
Yeah.
Is that not it?
There's an ordinance that's been prepared by staff. That's what we're discussing. Ordinance number 58-2024 is what we're discussing.
Consideration of an ordinance to extend the corporate limits to the city of Shelby, North Carolina. I'll make a motion we adopt ordinance 58-2024.
I have a motion from Mr. White to adopt ordinance number 58-2024. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. We are down to our consent agenda. I'll read these for the record. Number 1 is approval of the minutes for a regular meeting of November 4th. Number 2 is the LGC response for financial indicator of concern for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024. Number 3 is approval of a resolution authorizing the sale of City of Shelby-owned real property. Number 4 is City of Shelby's Uptown Streetscape and Pedestrian Improvements Project. Number 5 is approval of a resolution revising and amending the personnel policies of the City of Shelby to provide for an updated personnel policy and procedure manual. Number 6 is approval of a resolution accepting a dedication of land for the new location of South Washington Street. Number 7 is approved as a special event application. Number 8 is the management reports for the Raper Roark financial report. Number 9 is notice of cancellation in the regular meeting schedule of Shelby City Council. That's your consent agenda. Chair will entertain a motion to adopt the consent.
I make a motion we adopt the consent agenda.
I have a motion from Mr. Hopper to adopt the consent agenda as presented. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. Down to unfinished business. Mr. Howell, who's going to introduce this asset and inventory assessment? Is this
Mr. Wilson.
All right, Mr. Wilson.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. So, if you recall, way back in 2022, the city put in for funding for the AIA wastewater water treatment plant asset inventory assessments. So we did receive funds, $300,000 for the wastewater treatment plant and the collection system, and $100,000 for the water treatment plant. So from that, we selected HDR for the engineering portion and began work in January of 23. So HDR spent quite some time on this and provided us with a lot of useful information to have going forward. So I'm here to present that to you tonight. So just to let you know what the Asset Inventory and Assessment Grant is, it's here to funding that was provided by the state to support infrastructure assessments, enhance asset management, improve system efficiency, and promote long-term planning. So, the age of our waste treatment plant, built back in the 1960s, the water plant built in the 1950s. So along with that, you have assets, valves, motors, electrical equipment that has just experienced age over time.
From that, we come in and look at the assets that we have and have a plan in place to make it sustainable for the future. Also, we want to look at the system efficiency. Older plants may degrade over time. What can we do to make those better going forward? And then, most importantly, we want to promote the long-term planning so we can have a phased approach to keep the wastewater treatment plant and the water plant and our collection system going for many years to come. So we did a treatment plant capacity and reliability assessment where we wanted to determine the plant's capacity and reliability and its current future demands. So for the water treatment plant, we're currently a 12 MGD plant, 12 million gallon a day plant, and we looked at what it would take if we needed an additional 4 million gallons, so taking it to 16 million gallons. For the waste treatment plant, we're currently a 6 million gallon a day plant, and what it would take to get us to 7.5 and 9 million gallons a day. And then lastly, we wanted to identify an asset, assess our equipment, and prioritize capital improvement projects. So one of the things that HDR did was they made us a dashboard where they listed all 922 assets currently in the water plant and the waste treatment plant. And so each of those assets were given a condition rating and then added value and broke out over the expected usefulness of those assets. So one of the things you do notice here, besides a lot is front-end loaded on the amounts, is because the assets are so old. So if a typical asset has a 20-year life expectancy, our equipment is well past its normal life expectancy. One of the things that does speak to, though, is that staff and plant mechanics have been able to keep this equipment in good use much, much longer than its normal life expectancy. So we're still operating very well at the plant, even though we do have much longer and older assets. So same thing here, and as you would expect, where you see the higher bar graphs, 101, 189, 113. So the 101 was shortly after the plant was built. 189 there when the plant was expanded in the early 90s, and then here 113 when we added the clear wells on. But even looking at what our assets, like you said, from a phased approach, the 101 that we have now that's listed as very poor condition based on age, we are, with the water treatment plant project now, currently installing 88 of those assets. So we are eating into the older assets as we go. So with this, we also looked at what capital improvement projects we need to look at going forward. So CIP projects with cost estimates were recommended for reliability, redundancy, and expansion. So we looked at high priority projects, 0 to 5 years, medium priority projects, 5 to 10, and then of course low priority projects, 10 to 15 years out. So as I mentioned, on the waste treatment plant, we were looking at the $7.5 million and the $9 million expansion. But first we wanted to look at where we are now with the 6 million gallons a day. And so with that, it took us to the 7.5, because basically any work that you want to do now for making the more reliability on the 6 million would be what you would require for 7.5 million MGD. So once again, see here a lot more to add on the CIP plan to increase that. The blue there is to go to 7.5 million, and the yellow to take the treatment plant to 9 MGD. Same thing with the water treatment plant. I believe you guys have seen this before because this incorporated the Fox building property where we were adding equipment for future expansion. You know, the water treatment plant is pretty landlocked there, and so if we do need to look at expansion on that, use of the Fox building property would help us expand that. So the conclusions of the plant assessment that both plants are currently functioning well at half their design capacity. Our hydraulic modeling indicates that both can treat their maximum design flow, and we've addressed the identified capacity and reliability concerns will require a phased approach with prioritized capital improvements. So, like I was saying, just over a year, making the plant better over time throughout the years. Lastly, we had the outfall collection system hydraulic model. So this was very important as we have talked about the growth in Shelby. Purpose of the assessment was to develop a hydraulic model of our sewer outfalls with current conditions, model future flow scenarios, and provide proposed improvements. So this is a map of our current major outfalls. We've talked about there on the left side our first broad outfall, and then over here to the east, the Hickory Creek outfall. So as part of this study, we put out 11 flow monitors to gather data on what type of flows these outfalls were experiencing. So these outfalls were modeled at a 1-year, 24-hour design storm, a 2-year, 24-hour design storm, and a 5-year, 24-hour design storm. So our threshold here was for when we went to make improvements in these outfalls to model them where at a 2-year design storm we did not show any sanitary sewer overflows. So you can see some of these here that at the 1 year, 2 sanitary sewer overflows, on the 2 year, you increase in your sanitary sewer overflows, and then of course 5 years, multiple sanitary sewer overflows on our first broad outfall. There were no modeled SSOs on the Hickory Creek outfall. And then we looked at putting in all the proposed developments that were on the books at the time when this study was done. One of the most prominent there is the Blanton Farm property, and looking what that would do flow-wise to the outfall. So when we did input the first broad outfall, as you saw, we were already having SSOs with the first broad outfall. But there were increased SSOs with Blanton Farm, and so through that, we're moving forward with the first broad outfall improvement replacement, where we will upsize around 8,500 feet of sewer to get replaced and upsized. And with that is modeled that there would be no sanitary sewer overflows. So in summary, that both water plant and the wastewater treatment plant are in good condition, poised to take on additional demand. We have the beginnings of a roadmap for equipment replacement and expansions to ensure the reliability of our treatment plants while planning for future demands. And we've also validated the first Broad River Outfall Improvement Project to gain capacity for future demands while improving the aging infrastructure. So with that, are there any questions?
Questions from Mr. Wilson? I think a resolution has been prepared to say that we've accepted the information that's in it.
As part of the AIA grant, it does require a resolution acknowledging and approving the condition assessments.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, if I'm in order, I'd go
Go ahead.
make a motion that we adopt Resolution 72, 2024.
Have a motion from Mr. Hopper to adopt resolution number 72-2024. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. Next item is approval of a proposed ordinance amending zoning map of the city of Shelby. Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Let me skip forward a little bit, and I promise I'll leave you guys alone after this. So this is the rezoning that I said that has come before you once. Council requested that it be taken back down to the planning board for some additional consideration, and it is now made it back to you guys. You've seen this before, but I just kind of wanted to give you an opportunity to take a look at this again. So this section in, I don't know if it's going to show up on screen, it's not. The section in yellow is what you just approved for annexation. Those two, well, they're two parcels, but it looks like one on here. That little gray is what was already within city limits. Currently zoned R20, and our future land use map calls for it to be medium density residential. The request is to rezone this to R6 conditional zoning. Just as a refresher, conditional zonings are particular kind of consideration where council has the ability to sort of negotiate with the developer about the specifics of a plan. The developers have to consent to any conditions that you put on it. However, it's sort of a way to get a little more creative with designs or relax standards in favor of increasing standards elsewhere or getting what the community wants out of a particular project. This is the layout that you would be approving. You've seen this section, but this is what they have provided additionally that planning board was specifically looking for, which is the landscaping map. There were some questions about the open space area and how that would work between lots. That has now been provided, and the planning board at its last meeting has voted to send forward a favorable recommendation to approve this project. So the conditions, again, this is roughly, would be a density of 3.46 dwelling units an acre, minimum lot size of about 4,500 square foot, minimum lot width of 50. The developer has provided a traffic impact analysis, and that has been reviewed by our engineering staff. Sidewalks throughout the development, as well as a fee in lieu for the Borders Road frontage. All common space is accessible via sidewalk or trail as required by our UDO. This is something that we cannot require by state law, but the developer has offered, which are restrictions on the building materials. And so they are putting a condition on that says that the front elevations will either be brick or precast stone accents, and then the remaining elevations could be vinyl, whether that be vertical, horizontal, or shake, of cementitious fiber plank. And then minimum 20-foot driveway outside of the sidewalk. And again, this is consistent with our future land use map. Like I said, the Planning and Zoning Board has recommended approval. It does require a vote and, by state law, a statement of consistency and reasonableness. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions for Mr. Burgess? All right. As Mr. Burgess stated, you do need to make a statement of reasonableness if you're going to approve.
I tried to do this earlier, but I make a motion to approve the zoning request for 46.14 acres on Borders Road. It is consistent with the Shelby's adopted comprehensive plan, and this zoning request is reasonable because the request is consistent with current development patterns. It is consistent with the plan and zoning of the future. Planned future use.
All right, and that would be, you need to identify the ordinance number 57-2024.
Yes, sir. Ordinance 57, 2024.
All right, have a motion from Mr. White to adopt ordinance number 57-2024, along with his statement of consistency. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. All right, we have new business. We have none tonight. Mr. Howell, do you have some city manager's report?
Yes, sir. Before I start, I'm going to ask Mr. Longino to come give you an update on 3 or 4 issues at this time.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Just wanted to touch base real quick on a few projects that we have going on, just to give you all an update. I'll start with the annex. It's progressing quite nicely. They've had to do some additional structural work, but that is nearing completion, and we expect interior walls to start going up soon. The downstairs is completely open. Upstairs, they were able to reuse some of the cinder block walls, but the new framing and drywall will start to go up in the next week or so, and then that should take 3 to 4 weeks. As far as the chambers goes, we're still waiting on the interior designer to finish her part of the plans, to get them to the architect, to then get the bid package together. He touched base with her last week, and she said she would need about 2 more weeks to complete that. So that's going to be a tight time frame to get it to you all to approve and put out for bid in December. So we're most likely looking at a January time frame for that. For the dog park, you may see some preliminary clearing starting in the next few weeks. We've got some preliminary plans put together, and there are some smaller trees and underbrush that we're going to start clearing to try and stake things off and get a better idea of where the fencing's going to go. And we have a stormwater project that we have to finish before the dog park can start, but that is, I believe, out for bid as of Friday, so we're kind of trying to see how all those pieces are going to fit together and keep that moving forward. Just wanted to mention about the comp plan real quick. We have around, I think it was 762 when we looked this morning, responses to the survey. That's going to be open until about the end of the month. So if you haven't taken it, please take it. If anybody watching out there hasn't taken it, please take it. You can go to imagineshelby.com and it'll get you there. We're hoping for 800 responses, so we're very close to that, but definitely would appreciate more than that. That's continued to push forward. They've started working on a draft future land use map and some drafting some vision and goals from all the input that we've gotten so far. I believe that's the project update. I did want to give you a heads up. Mr. Burgess has been working on a text amendment update for the UDO. 160D was put into place a couple of years ago, but some of the language in our UDO was sort of copy and pasted together and could be kind of cleaned up. So we've worked with the School of Government actually to get those changes made, and then as staff has kind of gone through some day-to-day tasks and day-to-day requests, they've noticed some things that need to be updated. A good example of that is food trucks. We don't really have anything in our ordinance that speaks to that. So there are a few little things that we're trying to throw in there. We obviously want to go through a big UDO update when we finish the comp plan to kind of round that out and bring those ideas together. But this is sort of a little bundle in between to kind of just shore up a few things. But that's all I've got.
And comp plan is comprehensive.
Comprehensive plan is what we're calling it. Yes,
Okay.
it is primarily dealing with land use, but it will encompass a few other things too. So comprehensive plan. Thank you,
I
sir.
just wanted to make sure everyone was clear on what
I
a comp
appreciate that.
plan was. But thank you.
I can use too many acronyms sometimes. I understand.
Thank you for that.
So I just have a few things, or a couple things I want to mention to you. I do want to make note of the financial reporting indicator that was mentioned by the auditor, because I do take exception to it. And just some background for all of you. So there was a time within the city's history in the 90s where there were substantial transfers out of the electric fund to the general fund for operating purposes, much higher than there is today. And at some point in time in the mid-90s and the late 90s, there was pressure that was put by the local government commission on municipalities that operated electric systems to reduce the transfer that was being made. In some cases, we still have some cities that are electric cities that are transferring upward of 17-20% of their general fund from their electric fund. which is way too much. The city at that time adopted a policy that limited operating transfers from the electric fund to the general fund. Now, the purpose of those transfers are to provide the taxpayers with a return on investment that they originally made within the electric system and the natural gas system. So our policy says the city may budget annually an operating transfer from the electric fund to the general fund, as well as other funds, to provide the city with a return on investment, and the operating transfer amount shall be subject to the following condition, which essentially says you cannot transfer more than 3% of the value of the gross fixed assets. So if the value of our gross fixed assets is $30 million, then roughly $900,000. We're somewhere in the $35 million range, I believe is the last number I recall. And we are within that with the transfer we do annually from an operating transfer standpoint. The policy does not prohibit the transfer of electric funds for capital projects. So in this situation, the financial indicator that the auditor indicates that we had an issue with was, you will recall that the city transferred funds for its portion of the construction of the Shell Building number 4. That's what the indicator is showing. But our policy does not prohibit that, and we have done that in 3 subsequent Shell buildings, which we have sold, made a little bit of money on, and then repaid the electric fund. In 3 of the 4 Shell buildings that we've built, those customers have or will become electric customers, which provides revenue back to the electric system for the investment that was made. So I do have an issue with that being shown as an indicator, but that's the way I feel about it. I think Ms. Beam and I have an issue with the auditor, but having said that, that's some clarification we need to get in place within the policy so that it's clear that it is not an issue from a financial indicator standpoint. Does that all make sense?
Really?
And I think what this council and past councils have recognized is that if we have cash within the electric fund and we can create an industrial shell building that will create tax-based jobs and electric revenue, then it makes sense for the city to do that, because then there is a return on that investment that's made by the electric fund, and the money on the sale of the building comes back to the city anyway, and we get electric revenues. So having said that, I just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you.
Anytime the word indicator and on the financial side comes up, the local government commission, which I have a great deal of respect for and is an amazing part of what we have to deal with in terms of financials for both counties and cities, I think it's important to note they perform a vital role in regulating financial conditions of cities and counties. So I'm not taking issue with that. I am taking the issue with the interpretation of our policy.
So we'll get so the LGC will review our response?
They will accept our response, essentially.
Okay.
And we have written it such that we basically acknowledge that.
Right.
So, also, just wanted to note, I mentioned at our last meeting, I would like for us to set the retreat date. I think I gave you dates, and if I misstate these, please forgive me, of January, either Friday the 24th or the 31st, or Saturday the 25th, or February 1st. I think those were the dates I gave you. That's completely up to you. We're at your pleasure. You typically have given us about an 8 to 9 hour day for your annual retreat. So we can always use more time, but it's your
I think we'll get 10 hours.
What were those dates again, please?
Friday the 24th or 31st of January, or Saturday the 25th of January, or February 1st of January.
Okay,
Are
so
those Saturdays? What days are those?
Friday the 24th or 31st, or Saturday the 25th, or February 1st.
Okay.
These dates are
We're
not
going 2 days?
No.
1 day?
No, it's
One day.
It's one day.
Well, let's
It's,
do it
hopefully
Saturday.
it's one day.
Right.
Let's do it the 25th, then.
What?
All right.
No,
Wait, hold on a minute. Just hold on. All right, so we got this.
3 dates in January or a
We
date in
have 4
February.
dates on this piece of paper that we've got in front of us, 17th, 18th, 24th, or 25th. So you're giving us, you're saying the 31st is an option?
Those are options as well, yes. That-
All right.
I would ask that the 17th and 18th not be considered.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're ruling those out.
All right, those are out. All right. All right, 25th will not work for me. Already have another commitment that day. So is the 24th work,
24th, what, on Friday?
Friday?
That'll work.
No,
It'll work for me.
I would rather do a Saturday.
All right, so what about the 31st?
I'll have to do it.
Or
So
the-
which one? What?
Actually, we would be into the 1st of February if we're gonna,
That would be great.
No. Sooner the better. I mean, I'd rather go ahead and get it over with.
well, our options, 17th and 18th are out, according to Mr. Howell. 24th is a Friday, 25th, I'm out. You could do it without me, I guess. And then the 1st is
I
the,
think it'd be good if you did it without me.
Now, wait a minute.
Is everyone
You know.
available, is everybody available on February 1st?
yeah,
Yes,
February 1st.
Saturday.
All right.
February 1st.
Well, that's,
Actually, I'm
me
getting
personally,
free.
that wouldn't be good for me.
All right, you don't have, that's not good.
But you're not available on February 1st?
No, because that's my anniversary. We already got that planned.
All right, so,
So, no.
all right,
Stay away from the first. All right. Can we go back to
It's
the 24th or the 25th?
yeah, well, the 24th, the 25th, I'm out. I've already got a commitment that day. And the 24th is a Friday. Ms. Arth had an issue with
I
that.
just can't
'cause-
work on the Friday, do it
yeah,
on the
it's
Fridays.
just- And the 18th, is that out? I mean, is that, you said that's a no-go? for sure?
We could do the 18th if it pushed, yes.
What-
We
what
could
day-
do the
what
18th.
What day of the week is the 18th?
That's a Saturday.
Okay, yeah, it's okay with me.
January the 18th, right?
January the 18th. We'll make it work.
That works too.
Okay,
can do
that
that.
works.
Everybody good with that?
18th, look.
All right, we'll put some
I'm
pressure
good
on the
whenever,
staff, it
Greg.
looks like, but,
Sorry.
All right, we will, location to be determined. We will try and book the Scruggs Center if possible. If not, we'll find a location.
all right, January 18th is
January 18th.
definite, all right. Oh, yeah, it's MLK Day. Weekend, is that
But that's normally celebrated on Monday.
Monday? It's,
Yeah, on
Yeah.
Monday, so,
Yeah.
yeah, we can
We
stay
can
with the
do
18th.
that.
Okay, lastly, I just want to touch on a couple things. It was mentioned earlier that if you needed to, some help sleeping, that you could have a copy of the audit report. I'd also offer up, you could potentially have a copy of the HDR AIO report as well. Either one would work fine.
I would like that via audio file, please.
We'll have Mr. Longino narrate that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I would also say Mr. Burgess made a promise that he would, where is he? Mr. Burgess made a promise he would not bug you anymore. I know that's not true, because I do know for a fact he's got more public hearings coming up. And I hope there's not a quasi in those, but he's not indicated that. So I just want to point those things out. I think it's important for me to clarify those.
Oh, God.
all right. That's all you got? All right, we are down to council announcements and remarks. And I would just like to remind everybody, the Christmas parade this year is earlier. It's on December the 1st. So we will not have another meeting before then, so
December the 1st.
I will have a car, I'll have my convertible, but we'll need, if all of us are going to ride, we'll need another car. So if somebody wants to check on finding a second car for the parade, that would be good.
Yeah, what about lighting of the Christmas tree?
And I was going to mention that as well. The Christmas tree lighting is on the Saturday, the 30th, which is, that's actually 2 weeks, I guess. That will be the Christmas tree lighting up on the court square. They're actually having a festival or some type of event all day that day. I think Washington Street's going to be closed off, if I'm not mistaken, and they're going to have some activities and stuff. So, yeah, the 30th will be the lighting, and then the Christmas parade on the
Dancing fleas be
On
there?
December the 1st.
The dancing fleas will be there, leading the music.
All right, very good.
All right, and that is all I've got for announcements. Mr. Hopper, you got anything for us?
Nope.
Good. Mr. Weber?
No, sir.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
No.
Good.
I'm good, thank you.
All right, with all of that, I will entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Have a motion. Ms. Arth? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. We're adjourned.